All right, Rabbosai, good evening. Let's begin. We have a couple of minutes. Meretz and learning together until Ma'ariv. Let's get Rabbosai. So we're picking up in Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah on Tes Zayin Amud Beis 16b. 16b. So the Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah says, we actually read this last time, but let's begin it again. He says, Rachatz Laila Harishon Shemesa Ishto. So remember again, this is the same Rabbi Gamliel. Same Rabbi Gamliel, who again, it says 16b at the Mishnah. The same Rabbi Gamliel, who again we just learned about his marriage in the previous Mishnah. Ultimately, here we go ahead and learn that his wife passed away, and he bathed the night after she passed away. So the Gemara says, Amrulo Tamidav, his student said to him, L'maratena Rabbeinu, Rebbe, you taught us, She'avel aser lirchos, that an avel, a mourner, is not permitted to bathe. Right, that one of the restrictions of mourning is bathing. So here he was again. His wife had passed away that day, and that evening he was bathing. So I said, Rebbe, you taught us that you're not allowed to do this. Amr lahem, Eini kishar b'nei adam istinisani. He said to them, I'm not like other people. I am fastidious. I'm sensitive. So for me, not to bathe causes me incredible and extreme discomfort. So again, in general, when somebody who's kind of in that sensitive category has a different set of halachos. Okay. Ukishemes tabi avdo, when his servant. Now, both I remember again, in halacha, there are two different types of servants. One could have a Jewish servant and one could have a Gentile servant. So remember again, a Jewish servant essentially is an employee. We use the word servant, but they're not a servant. A Gentile servant is different. A Gentile servant is really owned by the master, even though, again, there's a whole code of conduct that the master has to have towards his Gentile servant. He's not allowed to mistreat him. If he mistreats him in any way, this servant automatically goes free. And the servant also undergoes bris milah for the sake of servitude, and then upon emancipation becomes fully Jewish. That's okay, so that's in a nutshell. So listen to this. So Rabbi Gamliel had a servant named Tavi. That was his name. When Tavi passed away, so Kiba Alav Tanchumin. So Rabbi Gamliel was like accepting consolation. You know, Hamakam Yinachem. He was accepting consolation for a servant. Amrlo Tamidav. They said, Rabbi, Limaratan Rabbeinu She'in Makablim Tanchumin Alava. Then Rabbi, you taught us that in general, you don't receive consolation for Avadim. In other words, both sides, here's what's interesting about this. What's the issue with receiving consolation? Well, actually, let's finish the Mishnah. Rabbi, you taught us that you don't receive consolation for avadim. Amar lahem, ein tavi avdi kishar kol avadim. My Eved Tavi is not like regular servants. Kasher haya. He was a very upstanding individual. Okay. Chasan imratza likros kriyashma layla rishon korei. I will say, remember again, in the previous Mishnah we said that a chasan, right, the man gets married. Again, man gets married for the first time. The halacha is that he is exempt from Shema the night of his wedding. So now the Mishnah says, what happens if the chasan says, I want to say Shema anyway. I want to say Shema. So what's the halacha? So korei, he's allowed to. In other words, we will say, this is actually an interesting discussion because what we see in halacha is there are certain times in halacha that you're exempt, but you could obligate yourself if you want to. And other times in halacha where there's a forced exemption. I'll tell you something interesting. You know, one of the interesting areas in halacha where this comes up is women and tefillin. Women and tefillin, right? So women are exempt from tefillin because it's a time-bound commandment. So let's say a woman says, I want to wear tefillin. Interesting discussion there. So again, here the Gemara says over here, the previous Mishnah, we said that a chasen doesn't have to say Shema. Let's say the chasen says, I want to say Shema. So we allow him. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Lo kol harotz lital Shema mital. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, no. You don't just say Shema because you want to say Shema. In other words, if halacha deems it that you are not in the right frame of mind to have kavanah to say Shema, then you know what? You don't say Shema. Even if you think you're able to, even if you think you're fit, we still don't have you say Shema. Okay, good. We'll say that's the Mishnah. A lot there. Says the Gemara. My time is Rabbi Gamliel. Let's start with the first part of the Mishnah. What was the first part of the Mishnah? Rabbi Gamliel's wife passed away, and he bathed that night. So she passed away by day, he bathed that night. So my time, what's Rabbi Gamliel's logic? Kasavra aninos laila derabanan dechsev ba'acharisa kiyom mar. U'makom istanis lo gazu b'rabanas. Well, this is actually very interesting. Rabbi Gamliel holds that halacha l'maisa, that when a person dies, so remember again, the period between death and burial is called aninus. Right, the individual, the mourner is called an onein. during that time, the mourner is exempt from all positive mitzvos. Interesting discussion. Why is there an exemption? Leave that on the side for now. There's an exemption. Then, of course, after burial, the Avel transitions into Avelos, into mourning. So what happened over here is like this. Rabbi Gamliel's wife died, let's say she died on Monday. So Monday night, he bathed. Rabbi Gamliel held that Aninos is only Da'oraisa, is only biblical on the day of death. The following night, the prohibitions of Aninos are only rabbinic. And the rabbis lifted their restrictions in the case of a person who's in istinus, in the case of a person who's very sensitive. So therefore, again, because it was nighttime already, and therefore, again, the restrictions on him were only rabbinic, and he had this fastidiousness, he was sensitive, therefore, again, he felt that he was able to bathe. Okay. Also, by the way, just so you should know, there's a lot of interesting discussion in general about this, about halacha l'maisa, like bathing, right? We know that the restriction on bathing is one of the restrictions of Avelos. So there's a lot of fascinating contemporary discussion about this. Obviously, bathing today is very different than the levels or the restriction or the just general hygienic practice of the times of the Gemara, or even later in the times of the Gemara. So a lot of interesting discussion. Again, not for now, but just to bear it in mind. All right. So remember again, the next part was that when his servant Tavi passed away, ultimately, again, he received consolation. So Tan Rabbanan, the Gemara says this house. Tan Rabbanan, Avadim u'shvachos ein omdin aleihem b'shura. So Avadim and shvachos, male servants, maid servants, we don't go ahead and stand on a shura. Now, both say shura means, you know how after a levaya, after a burial, so right, everyone lines up in two lines. The mourners walk through, and everyone says Hamakom Yinachim Esem Beso Shabei Leitzion V'Yerushalayim. So now the Gemara says, we don't do that for Avadim. We don't do that for servants. Now, why not? If you look at Tosas, for just a moment, Tosas, it's the last Tosas on the daf, Ein Omden Aleim B'Shura, Dilma Asi La'asuke Le'yochsin. This is actually very interesting. What are we concerned about? We're concerned that if a person receives that level of kavod at their levaya, people may think that they're Jewish. And there's a concern about ascribing a Jewish identity to an Eved who's not Jewish. That's a dangerous thing, right? There could be intermarriage, there could be a whole variety of different things. Therefore, the halacha goes ahead and says that certain practices you can't do for a servant. So you can't go ahead and line up by their levaya afterwards. You can't say they used to recite a bracha for the avelim, for the mourners. You can't do that. And you can't go ahead and offer consolation. Now, when we say offer consolation, we mean in the way that we do consolation. You can't do that for Abadim. So the Gemara tells an interesting story. One time, the maidservant Rabbi Eliezer passed away. Nichnesu talmidav lenachamo. Ultimately, again, his servants went in to console him. So now his maidservant passed away. Students were coming in to console him. Kevan shara osam ala la'aliyah. When Rabbi Eliezer saw students coming in, what did he do? He ran away. He ran to the upstairs room. The alu acharav. They followed him. Nichnas la'an pilon. Nichnas acharav. He went into another room. They followed him there. Nichnas l'traklin. Nichnas acharav. He went into the antechamber, the hallway. They followed him there as well. So also they obviously weren't getting the hint. So both literally translated means, I thought you guys would be burnt with lukewarm water. In other words, I thought you'd get the hint a little bit earlier on. Now I see you don't even get burnt even with scalding water. In other words, clearly you don't get the hint. Didn't I teach you? Ve'in omrin aleihan birchas avelim v'lo tanchumi avelim. So we'll say for avodim, for non-Jewish servants and maidservants, you don't form a line for them, you don't say the bracha for avelim, and you don't give the classic mourner's greeting or mourner's consolation. Elama omrim aleim. Rather, what should you say for them? What should you say when they pass away? Kishem she'omrim lo va'adam al sharo va'al chamaro shemesu. You should say the same thing that you say to a person when his ox or his donkey dies. Hamakom yimali lecha chesronech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should fill your void. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should fill your deficiency. They both say, so kach omrim al avdo v'al shivchaso hamakom yimali lecha chesronech. So too again, for the loss of a servant, say the same thing. So both say, just so you understand, the Gemara is not chas v'shalom trying to be insensitive to the loss of life. No, both say, what is the key to the survival of the Jewish people? The key to the survival of the Jewish people is genealogical fitness, right? Without maintaining genealogical standards for the Jewish people, everything unravels. Everything unravels. Well, so that's why, sometimes some of the, in Eretz Yisrael now, again, it seems like a million years ago, but you remember there were like these heated debates over conversions, right? Who has control over conversions? So some of it, all right, some of it might be about power, but the truth is, some of it is you have to maintain the integrity, the genealogical integrity of the Jewish people. There was a real concern, when a person had a servant, in a good servant relationship, the servant is like a member of the household. If now, again, we start performing Jewish rituals at the burial of this person, it's going to be very easy to see how people are just going to assume that this person was Jewish. And again, that could lead to a whole variety of genealogical disasters. So sometimes, again, in order to maintain the continuity of the Jewish people, we have to do things, we have to draw the lines. We have to, and again, it's never pleasant to draw lines, it's never easy to draw lines, but we have to draw the lines nevertheless. That's the idea behind this. It's interesting. There's a beautiful lesson from the story of Rabbi Eliezer, right? Rabbi Eliezer, right? He lost his maidservant, and right, they're coming in to comfort him. He goes upstairs. He goes this. So I'll say, what's the message? And I will say, sometimes in life we expect people to understand what we mean, even though we don't say it. Right? It happens all the time. Right? The root of so many shalom bayis problems is I expect my spouse to understand what I want, even though I haven't said it. Right? Or I expect my spouse to know what he or she needs to say. They should know it. I don't know. There's no prophecy anymore. So being that there's no prophecy, no one knows what you need unless you tell them. And no one knows what you mean unless you tell them. We spend so much time assuming that people should know what to do, how to act, what to say. So Rabbi Eliezer, can you imagine? Rabbi Eliezer is getting his steps in that day. He is getting his steps in, right? He is running all over the place. Instead of just saying, guys, no, no. It was my maidservant. Thank you so much, but we don't do morning practices for maidservant. And that would have been it. Instead, again, I will say, and by the way, how often does this happen in relationship dynamics, right? Had I just told my spouse what I need, right, we would have been done. Instead, I'm chasing here, she's chasing here, we're this, right? Everybody's running around in circles. Instead, we could have just had a conversation. And had we just had a conversation, everything would have been clarified. Everyone would have known what they had to do, and they could have moved on in life. That's why the Gemara brings down these stories. These stories are not just simply for entertainment value, because we like to hear stories. Right? These stories are profound and overwhelming moral, ethical relationship lessons as well. All right, let's go a little bit weiter. Tanya Idach, another brayso. Avodim u'shvachos, ein maspidin osan. Servants, maidservants, we don't eulogize them. We don't eulogize them. We'll say again, it's the same idea. I know it sounds, when you read it, it sounds a little bit harsh. It's not meant to be harsh. But what it is meant to draw a line. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to draw a line so that it's clear again who is part of the Jewish people and who is not. So what should you say? Because it's incredible. Rather, you should say, Rabbi Yossi Omer im Eved kosherhu. If the Eved was a good guy, then you could say Omrim Alov Have ish tov v'ne'eman miyigir. Both says incredible. If the Eved was a kosher, was a good person, you know what you should say about him? He was a good man, trustworthy, v'ne'eman miyigir, which means he worked hard and he benefited from his exertion. In other words, he was not a person who waited for other people to do stuff for him. If he wanted something out of life, he did it himself. Right? I'll say, how many of us, right? We spend our lives waiting for other people to do things, right? This one needs to do this, and this one needs to do that. Well, what do I need to do? Nothing, because everyone else has so much to do. I don't have to do anything, but everyone around me has to do a lot of stuff. So how do you eulogize? How do you eulogize a kosher Eved? Ultimately, again, he was a good man. He was reliable and trustworthy, and he worked hard. He made things happen for himself in life. This is great. Amrulo, im kein mahinachta l'ksherim. If that's the eulogy that you're going to give for Avadim, then what's a good eulogy for the rest of us? And there's a Rabosai. You know what the Gemara is saying? You know what the best eulogy you could give someone? What's the best eulogy? Rabosai, this is it. Sometimes we wonder, what's the metric of a successful life? The metric of a successful life is, if after 120, your family could stand up at your levaya and say about you that you were an ish tov, a good person, Ne'eman, someone who was trustworthy, someone who lived up to their word, someone who kept their commitment, kept their promises, v'nana miyagil, and a person who was a hard worker, never afraid of work, and whenever they wanted something to happen, they never waited for anyone else to do anything. They took action. They led by example. I'll say, if they could say that about us, right? If our families could say that about us after 120, that's a good life. That's a good life. So what's incredible over here is Rabbi Yossi saying, this is the hesped you should give to an eved. To an eved. So they said to Rabbi Yossi, hesped for an eved. Halavai, we should all get that hesped. If you say that about an eved, then ultimately, again, what have you left for the rest of us? All right, we'll stop over here. We'll stop over here for this evening. We'll daven Ma'ariv Emirz Hashem. Actually, let's go one more line. Fine. Tanah we have a minute. Tanah it's only a 30-second walk into the shul. Actually, you could daven Ma'ariv in here. Ma'ariv in here. Yeah, all right, we'll daven just Ma'ariv Ma'ariv here. Fine. Tanah in Koran Avos El Shlosha. We only call the Avos to three people. Right? Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In other words, we'll say, as opposed to who's not called Avos? Who's not called Avos? Right? Yosef, Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo, the Shvatim, all of the other tribes, none of them are called Avos. Vein Karni Imos, Eliarba, and ultimately, again, we only call Imos mothers to four: Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. That's it. So the Gemara says, Avos my taimo. What's the reason why only three people are called Avos? Well, maybe you say, you know what? I can't call the Shvatim Avos. Why not? Because we don't know which Shevet we come from. In other words, look, if you're a Kohen or a Levi, you know you come from Shevet Levi, but for the rest of us, we're not sure which Shvatim we come from. So how can we call them Avos? Well, if that's the case, because they're saying by Imos, right? By Imos. Again, do we know? Did we come from Rachel? Did we come from Leah? Did we come from Bilhah? Did we come from Zilpah? So the Gemara says, Ella, ad hocha chashivi, tfelo chashivi. Rather, what you have to say is like this. What it means is, there are three men, who get the title Avos, not because they were the only tzaddikim, but because they were the most important pillars that laid the foundational surface for our people. And four women who are called the mothers, not because there aren't other important women, but because these are the people who created the foundation upon which we build upon. So we'll say there are many great people in this world, and Klal Yisrael has been blessed with many great people. But Lamaisa, only three Avos, only four Imaos, because those are the people ultimately, again, who laid the foundation for Klal Yisrael. So I both say, Shkoyach, we'll stop over here for tonight. Incredible. I'm sorry?
What does that final study have to do with
this? Cause nothing. Nothing. All in the basement. But you find that all from the Gemara.
Yeah, but usually that's because it's quoting someone who said